Hello, and welcome to Decoding the Game, where we discuss behavioral engineering, the interesting intersection between behavioral psychology, game theory, and memetics. My name is Nils, and I'm a behavioral engineer. In this week's episode, I'll be trying to answer the question, what is play? But before I try to answer you, I'd like to start by making a controversial claim. Human civilization, and your culture in particular, was built on a long series of failures. Let me explain. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of our species is how we approach problems and what happens when we fail. We are not only peculiar in how we tackle problems, but also in the weird fact that we sometimes seem to relish them. Failure compels us to try harder. We seem to have been evolutionarily guided towards enjoying a challenge. Our brains reward us for problem solving, and as pattern seekers, we excel at finding problems to solve. The Dutch cultural historian Johan Huysmans, how do I say that guy's name?
Johan Huizinga.
Right. That guy coined the term Homo Ludens, or the playing human, to describe how we as a species seek out challenges for their intrinsic value. He argued that the difference between basic shelter, like a roof over our heads, and complex architecture was our desire to play. The idea was that our innate desire to play provided a surplus on top of our basic survival instincts that over time spawned what we today think of as civilization and culture. Whenever we engage in problem solving purely for the enjoyment of it, we stop thinking of it as work and enter the domain of play. The concept of work revolves around the undertaking of tasks or performing an action for a perceived reward, with the added condition that the performing of this task is in some way perceived to be necessary. The necessity of the act moves us outside the realm of voluntary actions and therefore also outside the domain of play. It should come as no surprise to you that necessity is a poor motivator, and we will often be reluctant and unhappy to perform tasks that we don't find enjoyable. The Dutch guy was onto something when he coined the term Homo Ludens. As a species, we strive to be entertained. So what is play? Like work, play is performing an action for a perceived reward, but without the added condition that the reward is necessary. The line between work and play is drawn between needs and desires. It's not the actions that differ, but rather our reasons for performing them. Let's picture some kids sitting in a sandbox trying to dig a really, really deep hole. Digging is play for them. But now, picture a grown man trying to dig a really, really deep hole. We are much more likely to think of this situation as work. How we feel about digging a hole is what determines if it's work or play. The intentions of the game designer does not determine if something is work or play, but rather the player's reason for engaging does. Where work is performed for an instrumental reward, I work so that I may continue living, play is voluntarily pursued for the intrinsic values of problem solving and entertainment. If you're not entirely clear on what the difference is between an instrumental reward and an intrinsic reward, let's take a moment to look at that. You are probably going to be more familiar with instrumental rewards because a lot of things in our society revolve around acquiring things with instrumental value. That a reward is instrumental means that we value it because it allows us to do other things that we enjoy. Money is a great example of instrumental value. The reason we enjoy having money is because it allows us to do other things that we like and to get things that we think of as necessary, like a place to live, electricity, food, and an internet connection. Although we rarely think about it, the reason we like getting paid is because in the long run, it allows us to do things like watch YouTube videos. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that necessity is a poor motivator, which means that giving someone money for performing a task is not a great way of making sure it gets done, at least not very well. Although common business sense tells us that giving someone money for performing a task will yield great results, the science of motivation doesn't seem to agree at all. In fact, giving someone an instrumental reward for performing a task can actually lead to worse results, as demonstrated in several famous experiments by researchers like Ariely and Glucksberg. Intrinsic rewards, on the other hand, are things that are a lot harder to explain why we like. It's not readily apparent why we like some things, and the reasons for why we enjoy them go so far back in our evolutionary psychology that it becomes hard to relate to them. We enjoy experiencing beautiful things, for example, although they're not particularly useful to us, but they still really get us going. Things like companionship, the feeling of belonging, Beauty, self-expression, making love, or the taste of ice cream are all good examples of intrinsic values, and intrinsic motivators are the best way of making sure people are engaged in what they're doing. A popular approximation of the general types of intrinsic motivators have been succinctly compiled by Daniel Pink in his book Drive. He argues that intrinsic motivators fall roughly into three categories: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These distinctions paraphrase self-determination theory and the work done by researchers like Ryan and Deci, who famously argued that autonomy, competence, and psychological relatedness were highly motivating. We'll talk more about motivation in coming videos, so make sure you subscribe to our channel. So, play is voluntarily performing an action for a perceived reward. If we perceive the reward as necessary, we think of it as work. That makes sense, right? Remember that work can happen in the context of playing games, and that play can happen in the context of doing your job. The distinction between work and play is not purely philosophical. It has some very real neurological underpinnings because of our brain's differing responses to intrinsic and instrumental rewards. Work and play engender different kinds of behaviors, and as game designers, it's important for us to know when to guide our players into either one of these mindsets. I've left you some links in the video description below, so make sure to read up and prepare for next week's episode. In our coming videos, we will be exploring what rewards really are, what engagement is, the psychology of social, and what memes are, and of course how all of this can be applied to game design, marketing, and product design in general. Thank you for watching, and make sure you subscribe to our channel if you want to know more about behavioral psychology, game theory, and memetics. My name is Nils, and I hope you'll join us next week as we continue decoding the game.